Hey guys, FilthyRobot here, bringing you another guides, tips, and tricks video. This time we're talking about Battle Brothers. Specifically, I want to teach you guys 10 things I wish I had known when I started the game. These are just little tricks and quality of life things that make the gameplay easier and more quickly advance your goals in Battle Brothers. So, number one. Number one is about collecting gear, particularly armor, but it applies to weapons as well. So this is one of the things that most beginners in Battle Brothers don't know, and that is how the gear system works and the best way to exploit that. In the early game, which this is not, but across the course of the game entirely, in fact, there are going to be enemies whose armor you want. These are often brigand leaders or knights or some strong enemy who has particularly nice armor that's above and beyond either the stuff you're wearing or certainly above and beyond the stuff that most of the other guys in the field are wearing. But sometimes it might just be in the early game when you start with really crappy armor, like 55 armor, and there's a brigand who's wearing 115 armor, or maybe he has one of the wolf helms, the wolf suits, the 140 armor, and you're like, man, that armor would be really great if I could get it. I want that. It's an upgrade for me, but how do I get that? And how do I get that both safely, and how do I guarantee that I get it? So the way the drops in this game work is the durability of the item determines how likely it is to survive the fight, and thus how likely it is to be available to be looted. Durability for weapons changes by every time that weapon makes an attack, the durability of that weapon goes down. This archer has fired a couple times. His bow is at 92% durability because he's taken some shots. When we go to melee characters, the more times they've swung their melee weapon, the more damage that melee weapon is, and therefore the smaller the percentage it will be that it drops. So if an enemy, like this enemy for example, has a weapon that I want, the trick to getting the weapon is to kill him as quickly as possible to give him as few attacks as possible. Alright, that's easy. The weapons are easy. It's basically the same strategy you have for any high priority enemy, kill them quickly. Armors are a little bit more tricky. Let's say that I wanted this guy's armor. This raider's armor is something I want. And one of the nice things about Battle Brother visuals are that the visual on the character reflects exactly what they're actually using. So when I look at this guy, I know from the visual what his armor is, what his weapon is, what is his both his torso armor and his head armor, and what his shield is and what his weapon is. So I can identify at the start of a battle, I can look around the field and see which enemy's gear do I want, if any, and which enemy's gear is really important. You can also identify legendaries like that, especially you can't see legendary armor. I don't think legendary armor is actually equipped on enemies, but you can see legendary shields and legendary weapons on enemies at the start of the fight just from the visual, just from the mechanic. For example, you can clearly see that this guy here, his two-handed sword is very different than the other two-handed swords. That's a legendary two-handed sword, and you can spot that on enemies. So we've identified that this guy is the guy whose armor we want. Well, there's a couple ways we can do that. If we only care about his torso armor, and this is a tip that's very helpful in the early game, we can bring flails. One of the attacks on flails is an attack that only targets the head. It's called Lash. And if you kill a guy by just killing his head, and therefore you don't do any damage to his torso armor, the torso armor has a very high percentage chance to drop, something like 95% if it's undamaged. All right. But let's say we want his head armor and his body armor. So we can't flail him down because that would kill his head armor. Well, the next thing to do is to bring daggers. And daggers are probably the best way in the early game for getting a hold of some equipment. So we're going to kill this guy off. We're going to try to kill this guy off. I'm going to take some risks that I would never actually take in a real game. I'm going to shoot over my own characters just for the sake of speeding up the tutorial. Okay, don't have to do that. All right, so good. He's down. Why do I care about him being down? Because let's say this enemy was dangerous. Let's say this was a brigand leader, or a brigand leader with a two-handed weapon or something like that, who does a lot of damage. We got to be careful about putting guys adjacent to him, because if we put too many guys adjacent to him, he can kill those guys. So what you can do is you can level characters who are particularly strong characters on the defense. And I do this in my games anyways. You guys have access to my build sheets. I level what are called mega tanks. And what I build on a mega tank is a fair amount of HP, a ton of melee defense, and a bunch of defensive skills. And that allows me to do something like this. So I want this guy's gear. I'm going to move my mega tank closer to this guy, and I'm going to get him, when I get close enough, I'm going to taunt him. And what this means is I don't have to be risking my other guys around him yet. I'm going to teach you a couple tricks for setting up safe daggers. Okay, so the first of them is bring the guys who are mega tanks into range of them, and I'll show you why. We move him forward, and we taunt him. Okay, The taunt means he is forced to attack me now that he's taunted, and he won't take defensive actions, so he won't shield wall and he won't riposte. And this is going to do two things. A, it's going to direct all of his damage to a guy whose damage I want him directing it to, which means I can bring other more vulnerable characters next to him safer. And B, it's going to stop him from blocking punctures. Punctures are a low accuracy attack, and it's a dagger attack that goes through armor. So we've taunted him. Now I feel a little bit safer about moving my other guys in. And we have a couple ways to control this guy. Ideally, we don't want him fighting back at all. It's okay that he's taunted. This is the kind of like the second best scenario. He's taunted. He's attacking a target that I want him to attack, but ideally I don't want him attacking at all. And there is a way to do that. If we can break his morale in its entirety, we can stop him from fighting back at all. So every time we move closer to a guy, when we have, if an opponent already has an adjacent enemy next to him, and you move another enemy next to him, he has to pass a resolve test. Because we had a guy next to him already and we moved another guy, he just failed his resolve test. And that brings his morale status down one notch. He was at steady, he's now at wavering. Wavering gives him a minus penalty to his melee defense, melee offense, range defense, and range offense. And actually, I believe also his resolve at this level. All right, we'll switch to a dagger. I'm going to switch to a dagger here. I'm going to wait for the end of a turn. Something else to think about when you're daggering is, remember, there's adjacency bonuses for each of your guys that you have adjacent to a target, where you get a plus attack roll. So I'm going to pass turn again on this guy. I'm trying to get as many people adjacent to him as possible. We'll move there. Another morale fail for him. Pull out. We don't have a dagger on this guy. We could pick up the dagger off the ground. I was actually going to talk about this a little bit later, but this is a good example of when it might be useful to pick up a dagger off the ground. So we'll pick up a dagger off the ground. And then I'll actually equip that dagger. I could have equipped it directly to inventory, but I didn't want to put the legendary on the ground. Even though I think, if I understand correctly, every time that you loot anything that goes on the ground is going to be a guaranteed loot. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, so we're still setting up for the dagger. I'm going to want to close this around on him in a moment. I don't have any more guys this turn who can be next to him. In other words, I have the maximum adjacency I'm going to get this round. I'll go for a dagger attack. The dagger attack hits him. I'll show you in a second which one I use, because there are two attacks on this, and we just broke his morale. This is really good. This means he can't fight back at all. He's just going to, on his turn, try to flee. It's also really good because it puts his initiative order last in the round. If he hasn't acted this turn, he goes to the end of this round, but for all rounds from now on, he's also going to be at the end of the initiative order, which means it's easier to control him. All right. Be careful here. Don't click it's over. If you click it's over, the fight ends, and this guy gets away with all of his gear that you wouldn't get otherwise. Click run them down. And then we're going to be in this position here. I'm going to just scoot over to make room for this guy. And here are your attacks as a dagger. Stab is your basic dagger attack. It does damage to armor. Don't use this one when you're trying to farm gear. The one you're interested in is puncture. Puncture has a minus hit chance, but it completely ignores armor. It does damage directly to the health underneath the armor, which means you're not taking any sort of armor damage on the character whose armor you're trying to get. So we'll move in, finish this round. We don't have a dagger on this guy, so that's fine. We'll just leave him there. Why do we want to finish this round? This gives us all the time in the world to kill him now, because he, on his turn, will attempt to run. If all of his tiles are blocked, he can't run, and therefore he just passes his turn, and that means we can take as long as we need to roll on dagger hits. And again, using puncture, we hit him again. He's taking damage, and his armor isn't taking damage, which means we have the maximum chance of getting that armor. Okay, so for daggering enemies, surround him, control him as much as possible. Generally with a mega tank is the best way to do that. Control the target so he can't hurt anybody. Surround him to help break his morale and prevent him from running, and to give you adjacency bonuses. And then puncture or flail him down to make sure that you get the armor that you care about. There's a couple other things I want to show you while we're in the combat screen here. This is probably, I guess this would be tip number 2. Tip number 2 is about retreating. As you know, if you just click the retreat button in the middle of combat, you can do it any single time. You'll get the option to retreat. If you retreat from this stage, all of your characters take wounds. And they're pretty serious wounds. You use that basically only as an emergency resort. Most of the time, if you are retreating, you're going to be moving to the edge of the map. It can be the north, east, south, or west edges of the map. And then you'll move onto these white flag tiles. And if you're on the white flag tiles and you click retreat, your guys don't take any wounds. However, something that's not as apparent is that it's actually 2 tiles. It's the white flag tiles and the tile immediately adjacent to that. So you can be in the side 2 rows, the top 2 rows, the bottom 2 rows, or the other side 2 rows, and still get retreats off. For a long time, I didn't know this, and this made my retreating, or made the retreating stuff often take one more turn than it needs to, and it's a pain in the ass to move 20 guys when you're trying to retreat. So just a little quality of life trick there. It's these two tiles, not just the one tile. All right, tip number three. You can retreat on the enemy's turn. This is one that is not, I didn't know for a long time. At any point, you can interrupt the turn order, even on the enemy's turn, by hitting escape. If you hit escape, you'll have the retreat option available to you. That means that you can very easily retreat even mid-enemy turn, which means you can fine-tune when exactly you were going to retreat if you have to retreat, to make sure that you're not losing guys, but you're maximizing the experience gain you get from a fight, or maximizing the number of enemies you kill in a fight. Which I thought was very helpful. That's tip number 3. Tip number 4, you can loot people mid-battle. And you already saw me do it this time when I switched the Daggering. That is one of the useful times. Sometimes an enemy weapon on the ground is more useful in your situation than the weapon you have. For example, if you broke your spear from spear walling versus like zombies, you can pick up another weapon. Or if orcs have broken your shield, you can pick up a shield off of the ground. Or another trick is if when fighting fallen heroes, if a fallen heroes are kind of annoying because they have decent amount of HP, they do a fair amount of damage, they often have great weapons, they have great swords, for example, and they resurrect. They resurrect once on their own, and then they resurrect over and over again if there's a necromancer resurrecting them. One of the ways you can take a fallen hero and make him a lot less dangerous is you walk over to the tile that he was on, and you grab the weapon that he dropped. And then when he resurrects, I want to put that in the friggin' inventory. Oh, I don't have action points remaining. It takes 4 action points or quick hands to interact with the tile there. But in that scenario, if this was a fallen hero and I had action points, you could pick up the weapon, and then every time that fallen hero resurrects from then on, he doesn't have his weapon, and therefore is a hell of a lot less dangerous. So that's another little trick that I wish I had known going into it. And then finally, you can do this for arrows. You can transfer arrows, either by picking up arrows on the ground or by dropping off the arrows you have, by throwing these ones onto the ground and then having another guy walk to this tile and pick them up. It's a little bit inefficient way of transferring arrows, but in a very long archery duel where like maybe you're on high ground, the enemy's on high ground, you're shooting a ton of stuff back and forth, this is one way that you can increase the total number of shots your characters are going to get. Okay, so that was number 4. You can loot in mid-battle. Number 5. This one I think again is one I've mentioned very slightly in another video, but I want to reiterate this, which is although you do recover 15 stamina per round, you do need to be aware, especially when you're passing your round, when you're skipping your turn to later on in the round, that any enemy attack on you causes stamina loss on your guy, even if it misses. A miss causes 2 stamina loss. A hit causes 5 stamina loss, and being hit with a mace is a plus modifier to that. I believe it's 10 stamina loss being hit with the mace. Okay, so let's say then that we have accomplished all we want to accomplish in this fight. I want to show you something else about looting. So we've killed him, and let's go to the loot screen. If you're taking my recommended settings, you are using auto loot, and there's a reason for that. And that is this. I actually don't think I have auto loot enabled in this campaign right now. We'll double check, but let's say you did. So let's say you're like me. You often have a very full inventory. You've been out in the wild. You've been min-maxing what you're picking up, but you're still taking as many fights as you can to gather experience and get the famed items. And your inventory is really full. And there's a bunch of stuff here. You can't loot it all. So you click loot all items, and there's a bunch of items left. And let's say you're trying to min-max your money here, which makes total sense. These items here take up inventory space. There's 3 types of them that will do this: gold, ammunition, and actually 4 types: gold, ammunition, medical supplies, and tools. All take up inventory space on the loot screen. But the game, when you actually click leave here, they instantly disappear out of your inventory to be added to your stockpiles at the top of the screen. And this will actually give us 2 extra inventory spaces. And what the game does with auto loot on is it will then take the next 2 remaining items in this inventory, the inventory over here. So what you want to do is you want to drag the most valuable items to this tile, to the top left ones, in the same number of stacks there are of ammunition, gold, medical supplies, or tools. Because what that means is you're essentially extending your inventory by, in this case, 2 tiles, but as many as 4 inventory spaces every time you loot a battle where you have a full inventory. And you will get between as many extra spaces as there are ones in your inventory. Food takes up space, so you can't do it with food. But for ammunition, and I don't mean like quivers of bolts or something like this. I mean the actual ammunition loot item there. So that's just another little trick, which means you can get 2 or 3 extra pieces of loot per fight, and this adds up over the course of a campaign where you're gonna have hundreds of fights. This is a couple hundred extra bits of loot you get to pick up, which just adds up. So that's number 6 rather. Excuse me. All right, let's talk about a couple other things. So I don't remember, did I have auto loot on this or not? No, I didn't have auto loot on. And you can see right now that because I didn't have auto loot on here, I have 2 empty inventory spaces. That's where the ammunition and the, what was the other thing we just picked up? It wasn't tools, it was ammunition and gold. Got taken from our inventory and applied here. And we didn't pick up those 2 arming swords because we don't have auto loot on. If we had auto loot on, we'd have 2 more arming swords in our inventory. Okay, number 7. This is another quality of life tip. There are a number of items in the game that cost 100. These are goblin poison, the ghoul teeth, which are one of the first items you get in the game, acid flask, just a number of them. The berserker mushroom. They're worth exactly 100. And what this means is when you go to a location, which we're going to do in just a second, you can use that piece of gear to get a sense of how much money they're paying you at that location. So in this campaign, in this save file right here, we're riding a caravan, and this is going to be another trick that I want to show you. This is number 8, I guess it would be, which is when you're on a caravan mission and your caravan's moving along, you can only go where the caravan goes, but you can still interact with towns. So when you're in a caravan, hit pause, interact with the town. You can still interact with towns that your caravan passes directly through. And I didn't know this for ages and ages and ages. And it used to really annoy me with caravan missions that I couldn't interact with the towns I went through, but actually I can interact with them. So that brings us back to the indicator item. When I look at my indicator item here is worth 13 right now. It's the total value of the thing is 100, but I could sell it for 13. And what this tells me is this is a really bad place to sell my loot at, because this way I don't have to memorize the costs of all the different pieces of loot or any piece of loot in reality. I can just see that based on what they're buying my 100 value item at, it's a very, very bad deal to sell here. The high ranges, you can get over 20. The mid ranges are like 18 or so, and you can get really, really low ranges. 13 is on the low side of this. So I use an indicator item almost always to get some sense of the value of how much the town is buying at. If you actually look into the town, you can see what bonuses are applied to that. Ambush trade routes make them pay more, but disappearing villages make them pay less. Your reputation with the faction, your reputation with the town, all this influences it. But rather than try to work that out every single time, the easiest way to do that is just simply to use an indicator item. And I keep an indicator item in my inventory across the course of the game, specifically for that. You can use any item you want once you have a sense of the value, but I like using the ones that cost exactly 100 because it makes it really simple to figure out what's going on with that. All right. So tip number 9. Taverns. Taverns are your best friend. Not only can you buy morale, which is always good, you also pay for rumors. You can't do this in the very, very early game because it's not a big expense, but it's enough of an expense in the very, very, very early game that you probably can't afford to pay for it. But once you get any sort of reasonable amount of money, this is one of the best ways to get famed items. You can only click it 4 times because after 4 times you get no information, and a lot of it's junk. Like this is pretty much junk. I heard the Council of Felshim is looking to hire mercenaries. That means there's a mission there. This one is mercenaries aren't very popular. Okay, that doesn't really tell me anything. This guy needs to go to the bathroom. That's not particularly useful. And this one says don't trust the militia here. They're all going to run. So we got no information out of this. But sometimes you will. You'll get something talking about either a location of a camp, or sometimes you'll get one talking specifically about a famed armor or specifically about a famed weapon. And this is a very, very good way to run down famed items to get an actual indication of where they're going to be. So I would strongly recommend once you have the money to do this, always paying for at least 4 rumors in any location with a tavern every time you're there. If I hit pay again, it's going to go to there. The text is going to change from this white to this brownie color, and then I'm never going to, and I can just do that a million times and nothing happens. It just costs me money. So, taverns are your friends. This is another tip for that. All right. The next tip here is caravan runs. This is again another tip, another caravan related one. This is the final tip, right? Famed items. Everyone loves them. It's really nice to find them. They're super rare. It's a pain in the ass to get. The best way to get famed items is to take the hardest camps. These are like the giant orc camps. The monolith guarantees you a famed item. The goblin camp guarantees you a famed item. But the very large camps are the best way to get famed items. But there's two other ways that are decent ways to get those. The first is running them down using Tavern rumors. This is going to be one of the ways that you can do that. And the other way to generate famed items at a fairly decent rate is to do caravan missions. When you run a caravan mission, what's going to happen is when you finally finish the caravan mission, and you get to the city that gets the caravan to it receives a buff called well supplied, and the well supplied buff gives a high chance that you have generated a legendary with that. So take caravan missions. This caravan mission that we've taken here is escort the caravan to Felsberg in the northeast. It so happens in this campaign I'm hostile with Felsberg, so it wouldn't help me, but if you weren't hostile with Felsberg, you can see that Felsberg has an armorer and a weaponsmith. That means there's a chance to generate a legendary in each of those locations, in both the armorer and the weaponsmith. So one of the tips to getting famed items is to run caravan missions to towns that have a armorer, weaponsmith, or Fletcher, because the Fletcher will give you legendary bows. So a caravan mission to Hagermoos here is not going to help me because there's only a tavern and a barber there. But a caravan mission that ended in, for example, Gravenhaven over here has actually nothing that helps me either. This one has, I believe, an armorer, and this one here has a armorer and a weaponsmith and a Fletcher. So you can make, you can help spawn famed items. You have to buy them still, doing it this method. But if you have a good amount of money, you can run caravan missions to generate famed items. Okay, guys. Quick recap. Talked about daggering. Talked about retreating on 2 tiles. Talked about retreating during the enemy's turn. Talked about looting mid-battle. Talked about misses and hits causing fatigue. Talked about the looting trick with auto loot. Talked about using an indicator item to give you a sense of the value of your gear so you can sell at the best prices. Talked about taverns giving you leads on famed items. Talked about caravans generating famed items. And we talked about entering towns while you're in the caravan mode, which is pretty damn useful as a whole. All right, guys, hopefully this was useful. As I said, these were just little quality of life things, not particularly, there's nothing amazingly complex or challenging here, but at the same time, these were a lot of things that I didn't know when I started the game and that were really, really helpful once I knew and understood them. So thank you for watching, guys. Hopefully this was helpful. Please leave comments in the comments section. Let me know what you think of the Battle Brothers Guide videos. I know I'm talking to a very select audience of my overall viewers for this game. This game has been so much fun for me that I wanted to do some guide videos for you guys to share some of the information that I've learned about this game. Thanks for watching, guys. See you soon.